right, everybody. Good morning to you, and of course, welcome to Exploring Buddhist Concepts right here on the Era TT Radio. And of course, this is where we're joined by Cassie Senghor. Cassie, good morning to you. How are you doing?
Good morning, Sir Charles. Well, I'm doing all right because you'll notice that you're seeing my face for the first time.
Yes.
Not for the first time in life, but on this
On the
program,
platform, yes.
on the platform, because I'm using my phone. I just realized that my laptop does not have, well, to me, it has insufficient charge. And I didn't charge it properly,
Mm-hmm.
So I said, look, let me just use the phone. And well, I just changed to that, and I waited on the lady to finish speaking. Now, so I'm going through, right?
Yes, go ahead. It's all yours from here on.
All right then. So, may whatever we say here today and do here today be of benefit to ourselves and to all sentient beings. There's a prayer that we use at the beginning of our meditation and our talks and so on, which I would like to share. And because these programs are recorded and you can always go back to them, you can always go back to the prayer that I'm about to use here. Okay, so it's more for the lay person, and it's called the aspiration prayer, and it comes from a course called the Joy of Living. And it says that may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness untainted by suffering. And may they abide in great impartiality, free from attachment and aversion. All right, and these are called what we call here the four immeasurables, because you can't measure loving kindness, you can't measure compassion, you can't measure joy, and you can't measure equanimity or impartiality. So today I am intending to speak a little bit about joy, which is one of those immeasurables that I just read about. And first of all, from what I have been researching there, you get little quotes and so on that help us along the way. And the very first one that I want to use says that joy, which is the third of the immeasurables that I just read out, that says, may they never be separated from the sacred happiness untainted by suffering. The little quote that I want to use out is found in 5 words, which are, joy is found in virtue. Okay? And there's another one parallel to it that says, one who has moral ethics is the source of all joy. So, because we call it immeasurable, and because we can tap into it at any time because of practice, it is very potent and, how to say, easy to use in a sense, in that we can get it. Because when we look around, I mean, like, I'm listening to radio all morning. and everything seems to be depressing, man, you know. And I feel it. I feel it with everybody else, just like everybody else. I feel it. And sometimes, you know, you want to throw your hands in the air and say, well, why you're talking Buddhism and what the Buddha taught and, you know, all these kinds of things. And why are you feeling this kind of way? You know, I mean, this suffering seems to be so pervading. But then that is how it is at the present time. Because when you depressing things are happening. So this morning we want to see, well, what is this joy about, and what can we really do about it? So the extent to which there will be any talk from me might be a little bit, but there will be more of a reading from the book How to Grow Your Own Happiness by Senghor. And the reading says in her book, Grow Your Own Happiness, and the chapter is chapter 8, by the same name of the book. I will begin to read and we will see where we can go from there. All right? Now, just let me remind you, Sir Charles, that one or two folks have been telling me that they try to get in and they can't. I think we have an agreement that you will either call, well, at least one of them, or they will call you and they will have questions and or comments and so on, right?
Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
so right. So just let me repeat what I said earlier. Joy is found in virtues. And I also said, that's a quotation there, one who has moral ethics is the source of all joy. Now, in this chapter that I'm about to read, I was really looking for paragraphs, sentences, you know, that I could pull out and, you know, extend upon. But it is so well written that it does that for itself. And so I don't think, unless callers or viewers want, that I need to do that. So let me just read what Senghor says in her book. There is a place inside us where happiness already lives, independent from any external condition. Now, one can interchange the words there, happiness, with joy. Okay? Now, joy has its special place and its special taste and flavor in Buddhist philosophy. Okay? The Sanskrit word for joy is mudita. And in many instances, I would say, sometimes the translation is more than what we get in English. You know, you are constrained by having to use a word. So mudita is translated into joy. But it could mean much more than that. Love, compassion, and joy are the natural qualities of our mind. But because we are caught in our mental struggle to recognize them and feel miserable. This is what I was just saying there. Caught in our mental struggles with all that is going on around us, with all the wars, with all the firings, with all the domestic and school, etc. violence, with all the question about drugs. But I'm still going into, interrupting myself there, so to speak, because something might crop up in my mind as I read. I think it was the day before yesterday, I was listening to a program on another station, and a lady, she's a regular kind of call, as far as I am aware. And she called in to ask the question. She's a lady who does things like that. And she said, at what age do you stop drinking? Well, she was being tongue-in-cheek with that. But, how to say, it woke up something in me, because really and truly, if you're looking to raise the age that one should start, then there should be an age where one should stop, because we know the damage that drinking does to physical, mental, spiritual bodies. So to me, that was a very pertinent question. At what age do you stop? I passed through that kind of stage already. And when I realized the damage that was being done, what should I say? This children are going to grow up and see the daddy, coming home drunk. I said, nah, boy, that can't have that, I can't continue with it. So, this is why growing our own happiness is more about removing what prevents it from naturally shining forward than artificially building something from scratch. Firstly, we must become aware of all the habitual negative patterns that plague us and replace them with more positive ones. Now, we're talking about tendencies here now. You grow with certain habits, certain tendencies. You become an adult, you find them hard to break. You're under peer pressure, under social pressure, you're under national pressure, because the nation does this, does that. This is how we as a nation live. We like one thing. Mostly pleasurable things. And sometimes we mistake that for joy. But the difference is that with pleasure, it is always temporary. You go for your pleasure, you get the pleasure, and when it is over, you feel defeated, and then you have to go and refill. It's a temporary thing. The joy that we are referring to in Buddhism is more lasting, is deep-seated, and is worthy of tapping into to dissuade us from jumping into pleasurable things when we feel depressed or we feel the need to do something different and to enjoy life, so to speak, sense of well-being. We then open our hearts and let compassion, joy, gratitude, and love grow organically. The problem is that in our view of the world, adversities and problems are the destroyers of happiness. They inherently oppose each other, so that when they are present, there can be no joy. When these adversities of life crop up in our life, there can be really no joy. And yet, because that is suffering, we want to escape suffering. Nobody wants to go out there and suffer. So we do this thing that will bring joy, that will bring happiness, only to find that it will not last. They cause harm, they might even cause, well, they definitely cause more suffering. And so this cycle, continues on and on, you feel a certain way, you go for a certain pleasure, it lasts for a while, you feel a certain way, you go for a certain pleasure, it lasts a while. And that's a cyclical occurrence is where we live most of the time. And sometimes to come out of it, people go to various religions or to various heads of religions, kinds of religions to seek a remedy to get out of it. Sometimes it's not religion, sometimes there are institutions, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, institutions that aim to help us to get out of these things. I have taught already at school where the men that I faced, and all of them were the young men. The men I faced, there's only men actually, were not all young men, were on mostly cocaine. There was someone marijuana, but most one cocaine. And I taught at that institution quite a while. And there were from our intervention, because Cirilla, who you know very well, such as Cirilla, we call her Cirilla. Cirilla Staley was at my side, and we both were teaching these young men together in this institution. And there were one or two successes. And then there were one or two, at least after we left, I would meet one or two who were still on it. Some had gone back to the prison. Some preferred to be in prison. Can you imagine? And but there were one or two successes. One, for instance, I know he opened his own computer business. It was the early years of computerization, and he opened his own computer business, and was quite successful at the venture, and so on. And then one who came as a security guard. At first I saw him and he was a bit shaky. I wasn't too sure whether he was in or out, but nevertheless he spoke about, being employed, and I wished him. As I speak now, I hope that he is still free from the addiction and that sort of thing. So the problem is that in our view of the world, adversities and problems are the destroyers of happiness. They inherently oppose each other, so that where they are present, there can be no joy. However, much of the suffering we experience when confronted with adversities and problems doesn't come from them, but is self-inflicted through lack of awareness and perspective. about that. Lack of awareness and perspective. One of the, I was probably early in my practice of Buddhism while at that institution, so that a bit of what I was doing could have been seen at the time as unorthodox, you know, and the students noticed that with some surprise, but with thankfulness too, because they had not broached as we were broaching them. With the we said, and then, you know, I don't know to what extent Cyrilla is listening, if she's listening or thing, but I know that she certainly remembers our interventions up there and the kinds of things that they would say about how Cyrilla is quite adept, you know, at teaching life skills, and therefore our approach to them and to their problem sometimes like what you might call out of the box. So these students, like many of us who have been addicted and who suffer a lot from things like that, come from, they don't come from them, but the self-inflicted. In other words, that they don't just come from on the outside of peer pressure, you know, national pressure and so on, but they come from through the mind of the victim, through lack of awareness and perspective. Awareness, I've mentioned on several occasions on this platform here. Awareness is the essence of meditation. In other words, when you sit down to meditate, whether it be for 5, 10, 15, 30 minutes, it is awareness that we are aiming to put to work, so to speak, then. But before we can get to putting awareness to work, as I have said on many occasions here, we must first of all calm the mind. And so you would see in earlier videos where again from this book too, you know, I read pointers on how to sit and what to expect and what to do. Of course, part of that, part of telling you how to sit and what to do and so on, comes from the fact that Sir Charles was saying, you know, when he sits down, all these thoughts bombard him, and he seems not to be able to sit still for any time. My reply to that thing in general, not just to Sir Charles, but because of my experience, my similar experience, and the experience of all of us who have entered meditation, is that is quite natural, quite normal. It's not something to run away from, something to make us feel that, hey, this thing is not going to work. As a matter of fact, just noticing all these thoughts coming is a step in the right direction, because we don't normally even notice that these things are happening in our lives. So when we do sit down, it is as though mind is saying, oh yeah, you mean to say you're going to interrupt my normal schedule of you know, multiple thoughts and straying and what we call in Buddhism monkey mind, where you're jumping from here to there to everywhere, you can't focus. You know, I mean, your focus, we do get through, I mean, you know, we do get through things during the course of the day. But generally speaking, the mind is not focused enough then. I mean, let me just ease it up and say enough for clarity so that we can see what is happening in the mind and attend to it or attend to them. And this is why in this book there has been so much reference to suffering that you may feel that happiness was forgotten. We have seen people go through terrible hardships and never despair, who are still loving, grateful, and happy. It is a mistake to imagine that we can only be happy when all the problems and difficulties we face are solved. Because that thing, I remember when I was teaching another group now, young men and women, who did their senior teenage years, and having to discuss the question of waiting for all the lights to turn green. You know, I remember that quite clearly. And we, you know, when we did go out like on an excursion and so on, and you know, we might be going up the priority or whatever, you know, I well, not necessarily the group, but I would remember that, you know, that here we are waiting for all the lights to turn green. Now, if we waited on that before we left, we would never have left on our excursion. And that is what this is saying here. That we believe, we imagine that we can only be happy when all the problems and difficulties we face are solved. And sometimes we take that into our meditation too. You know, what we take into our meditation. We take into our meditation the idea that by sitting still, we might solve, we are going to solve everything like, you know, overnight and so to speak. You know, that we don't have to make effort as it were. You know, the mere fact that we are there is going to solve everything overnight. But that is why when we sit as beginners in particular, that we are guided, hopefully, you know, we don't just do it by ourselves in the beginning, that we are guided to use the breath as an anchor for coming back to it all the time, which is tantamount to coming back to the present moment, where we can experience slowing down of the thought process. We can experience a calming of the mind, which is what is intended, especially for beginners. We want to get the mind in such a state then that we can begin to see for ourselves what is what and what is happening in front of us. Even if for a brief moment all seems well, something else will come up to spoil the party. Just taking on the time here, right? Something else will come up to spoil the party. I mean, all of us know that so well, you know, that you're going along merrily, you're doing this, you're doing that. And somehow or the other, like another problem arises, you know. For instance, you know, one of the things that I do sometimes, you know, is while I'm walking along the road, I may overhear a conversation taking place. And I would say 99.9% of the time, there's a problem in it. You know, people are not talking about joy and happiness and well-being and so on. They're talking about the problems that they are facing with themselves or with each other and so on and so forth. You know, you go into clinics. I attend a clinic. You know, there's much talk in the clinic, but the people are there because they want to be cured and get relief from physical suffering and so on. You know, and sometimes there's a quarrel about having to wait and gotta put aside so much time because this will happen. You know, I mean, I'm sure I'm talking to people who know what it takes. I think, for instance, this morning there, just before this program, so Charles was talking about the trauma. I am using that word. The trauma he has to go through with the SCT and these service provider, and then and the lady who called after that to support him, Sir Charles, with her own similar experience. So there you have it. You know, nobody's experiencing joy in those circumstances. But what we are saying in Buddhism is that it is that the suffering, the depression, etc., is not really coming from those things, but it's coming from our perspective, the way we look at them. And here is what Senghor goes on to say about our approach to those things. We must learn how to take everything in our stride without constantly delaying happiness. I have lived, this is Senghor speaking in her book, I have lived for quite a few decades and have experienced many trials and tribulations. But I, fortunately, found Buddhism early in life, and this has given me the tools to transform my suffering into happiness. So there we are. For some people, they have that good fortune, that good karma to meet Buddhism at an early age, be trained, as it were, begin to understand the concepts, begin to practice and so on. And of course, when that happens, that is indeed, something to be really joyful about. I wish that could have happened to me, and I wish that could happen to many other people along the way. I wish that could happen to my grandchildren in particular, where they could meet Buddhism at an early age. And in spite of whatever religion their family is, that they could find some time within their lives, within their daily life, to sit still and to begin to learn to meditate. This will, I believe, help them certainly in their growth and development. But this is just me. I convey that to their parents, to the elders surrounding them, in the hope that something will be done, and hopefully we will see the result of such action. For someone who is in her teens, realized she wasn't very good at being happy. This is quite an achievement. That is What is the achievement? Meeting Buddhism at that early age. If I did it, so can you. Thanks to the Buddhist teachings, I have understood that if we constantly fear, suffering will spoil whatever enjoyment we have. We can never relax and be at peace. Our fear and rejection of suffering can be so strong that it is actually the fear and rejection themselves that make us suffer the most. So she's reinforcing what she said earlier. It's not what's on the outside there, you know, these things coming at us through the senses. But the fear in our own mind then, and the rejection, you know, in the four immeasurables that I read of, the last one that I referred to, called equanimity, you know, that all beings be free, live in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion, you know. So there's a fear of being, of these things that harming us, and therefore we have, you know, throw our hands in the air, like I said. We give up and we turn to pleasure as a solution. Our fear and rejection of suffering can be so strong that it is actually the fear and rejection themselves that make us suffer the most. And that is why we must have a good a good look at suffering. Recognize its causes, learn to accept it, and eventually transform it. How can we look, accept, and transform suffering to joy? Through meditation. And I know no other way. It equips us, and teachers will guide us. Sometimes we get guidance ourselves. You might call that insight, you might call it grace, you might call it merit. But, you know, sometimes it comes to us then as to what we should do in order to look, to recognize, and to accept, in order to transform our suffering into joy, which is an immeasurable thing, which has no depth, no width, you know, no arms, no legs. There's a deep feeling which can rise up, or which we can practice with in order to make life that much joyful, in order to bring about less suffering in our lives, while all the despair and depression and wars and everything are happening around us. For us to develop, it's 11:45, all right, so I'll just read the last chapter here, and I'll bow. For us to develop a level of happiness that can encompass suffering, we need to let our hearts grow bigger. If we don't feel the connection with others and don't have a purpose that goes beyond our self-interest, it will be very difficult to achieve this. Developing compassion and kindness and becoming involved in altruistic endeavors will naturally make our lives significant. With a sense of purpose, everything in life gains meaning, and we realize it is both through happiness and suffering that we gain depth as human beings. We can then let go of fear, develop acceptance, gratitude, and trust. And I will add there and bring joy into our lives. So just before I go, so Charles, just to let you know that we, the Buddhist group in Trinidad and Tobago, we call it the Carrier TT. We are very thankful for the opportunity to do what is being done here today and over the past weeks. And I think we began in April, so April will be a month, it's June. We are approaching almost the end of our third month in doing this. We are very thankful. And next week, I will be introducing the head of our steering committee in Trinidad and Tobago. I will introduce him, and he more or less will we can carry out the talk for next week. We will see how it goes, whether it's going to be, they will fine tune it, as that will be question and answer. He will speak as I am doing now over the 45-minute period. But that is one of the things that is going to happen. And so I'll be on more fortnightly than weekly. So like this week I'm on, he's on next week, I am on the week after, another person might come on the following week, and so on and so forth. So we can look forward to hearing other voices during this 11:45 a.m. period on a Thursday morning. And please, folks, when you come to the video, please like and subscribe. Thank you, Sir Charles.
Okay, thank you very much, Cassie, and I look forward to the other individuals joining us on the platform. So people, this has been Exploring Buddhist Concepts right here on New Era TT Radio.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be happy. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be happy. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease.
This summer, give your child skills of a lifetime with several boot camp. Children between the ages of 5 to 17 come enjoy Children Iron Chef Competition. Your child will learn to prepare healthy breakfast, lunch, dinner, CPR, first aid, and conflict management. With field trip, your child will be given free apron and certification upon completion. Call